It always unfolds in the same way. She doesn't see you for who you truly are, but rather for the version of you she imagines in her mind's eye. You can almost feel it in her gaze, a flicker, maybe hope, maybe desire, but it's something more complicated than just being noticed. What you think is recognition is really a kind of measurement, a silent evaluation. You become a blank canvas to her, waiting to be shaped into a vision she's been crafting long before she ever met you. But here's the catch. That vision, that masterpiece she's painting, it's not really you. It never has been. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist who spent his life delving deep into the hidden parts of the human psyche, called attention to this phenomenon. Not with gentle encouragement, but with cold, clinical clarity. He devoted his career to mapping the unconscious mind, the part of us that operates beneath the surface, beyond our immediate awareness. What Jung revealed about women is both profound and unsettling. He found that women often don't fall in love with men as they truly are. Instead, they fall for an idea, a fantasy, a projection onto a psychological canvas. And the scariest part? Most women aren't even conscious of this process. What you think is her choice, her selection of you, is actually her choosing a version of you that exists only in her imagination. A kind of puppet crafted to fulfill a role in her inner story. When you inevitably stop fitting that role perfectly, she doesn't rewrite the story, she changes the actor. Jung called this psychological mechanism the animus, the inner masculine figure residing in every woman's psyche. When the animus is immature or underdeveloped, it can become a controlling, even tyrannical force. It pushes women toward dangerous men and away from the ones who genuinely care. It fuels needless arguments, domination without wisdom, and moralizing without responsibility. Jung didn't sugarcoat this reality. He described it as a kind of spiritual possession, a state where a woman loses touch with her own conscious self and acts instead from the shadowy grip of this internal masculine fantasy. And men, well, most men fall into this trap because nobody ever taught them how to recognize it. We confuse being desired with being truly understood. We mistake being chosen with actually being seen. We buy into the words when she says you're different, special, unique. But in truth, you're just the latest actor playing a role she's been rehearsing since childhood. And when the fantasy collapses, when the illusion slips away, you're left feeling betrayed, confused, and humiliated, wondering desperately what you did wrong. The truth is, you didn't do anything wrong. You just stopped being convincing in a role that was never really yours. Jung's answer to this dilemma was a concept called individuation. A lifelong, often painful journey toward becoming whole and fully yourself. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most men never even begin this journey. Society trains us to chase approval, to seek validation, to let others define our value. And as long as you do that, you'll remain stuck in the same cycle, playing the same part repeatedly until the audience loses interest and finds a new actor. Individuation isn't easy or glamorous. It's brutally honest work that demands you confront the parts of yourself you'd rather hide. The weak, the vulnerable, the broken. It requires you to stop blaming others for not seeing who you really are and start seeing yourself clearly. Because what Jung understood that most men never will is this. You don't become a man by being chosen or accepted by someone else. You become a man by choosing yourself, by owning your worth without relying on anyone else's approval. A man who has faced his own unconscious can't be manipulated by these projections. He refuses to be a puppet in someone else's fantasy. Instead, he writes his own story, controls his own reality. Jung saw the greatest tragedy of modern men not as rejection, but as willingness to mold themselves into whatever shape they think will be accepted. You call it compromise, partnership, or love. But Jung called it self-betrayal. Men who neglect their own inner development become slaves to the feminine projection, bending and reshaping themselves like malleable clay to fit the vague, often unconscious demands of women who don't truly understand what they want. You lose yourself in this process. You become a mask, smiling, agreeing, performing, until you forget the person you were before you put it on. Women sense this far more deeply than you realize. The very traits you think will win her love, obedience, predictability, constant availability, become the reasons she loses attraction. Why? Because according to Jung, the feminine instinct isn't drawn to comfort or certainty. It's attracted to mystery, risk, and the man she can't fully define or control. When you reveal everything about yourself without boundaries or strength, you don't become more desirable. You become invisible, replaceable, disposable. And yet here's the cruel paradox that traps so many men. You fear loneliness more than you fear losing your authenticity. You'd rather lose yourself completely than lose her. You'd rather live a role than confront the terrifying silence of standing alone without applause. But Jung was clear. Freedom only comes through embracing that solitude. He wrote that individuation is not for the faint-hearted because it demands a kind of death before death, the death of the false self, so the real self can be born. Ultimately, to break free from the trap of projection and fantasy, a man must stop being an actor in someone else's play and start directing his own life. He must confront his shadows, face his insecurities, and stand fully in his own truth. Only then does he become truly visible, not just to others, but to himself. And in that visibility, he finds a freedom no fantasy can ever offer. To truly grow, you have to let go of all the false versions of yourself, the masks and pretenses that no longer serve you, so something authentic can finally rise from the ashes. But here's the hard truth no one likes to admit. This process of becoming who you really are, what Jung called individuation, is profoundly lonely. It's a solitude that cuts deep because as you walk this path, you begin to see realities you can't unsee. You start to recognize the roles people play, the facades they maintain, and the comforting lies they tell themselves just to survive. When you try to share these hard truths with others, they often push back. They label you cold, arrogant, or too intense. They accuse you of being the problem when, in fact, you are merely holding up a mirror. And people hate the mirror when it reflects something about themselves they don't want to face. Jung understood this dynamic intimately. He spent years working with patients terrified to confront their own shadows, the dark, rejected parts of their psyche they refused to acknowledge. And for women, he warned that many grow up in societies that encourage them to avoid this inner confrontation. They are told they are pure, sensitive, intuitive, complete as they are, without ever having to face the shadowy masculine energy dwelling inside them, what Jung called the animus. This animus can speak with a false sense of certainty, authority, and moral superiority that masks deeper insecurities and unresolved conflicts. If a woman fails to integrate this inner masculine presence, she becomes trapped by it, projecting it onto every man she encounters and blaming them for the internal struggles she refuses to fight. Meanwhile, you might believe you're her savior, that if you just love her enough, prove yourself loudly enough, or perform well enough, she'll finally accept you for who you really are. But that's not how projection works. Projection is a thief. It steals what is real and replaces it with illusion. Until both partners wake up to this, they are doomed to repeat the same heartbreaking cycle, each blaming the other, both dancing with shadows they refuse to name. Here's the cruel irony. The woman who once saw you as her hero will one day see you as her enemy, not because you changed, but because you failed to live up to the fantasy she cast on you. She may not even realize she's doing it. Jung called this inevitable psychological betrayal, a fallout that happens when neither party takes responsibility for their own inner world. You didn't lie to her. You didn't betray her. You simply failed to be the invisible character she created in her unconscious mind. You were never really that person to begin with, and that's why she resents you, not for your real flaws, but for not fulfilling the myth she expected you to play. Jung famously said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Nowhere is this more evident than in romantic relationships. Men and women enter them not as whole, integrated individuals, but as projections carrying their unhealed wounds, unmet needs, and unresolved childhood pains. You call it love. Jung called it possession. Like a hypnotized man, you keep falling into the same trap, convinced this time it will be different. But it never is. Not until you ask yourself the most terrifying question: what if I am the one responsible for this cycle? It's easier to blame women, to label them as manipulative, deceptive, or shallow. But Jung would look you in the eye and ask, why did you let yourself be chosen by that woman in the first place? The man who refuses to confront his own inner feminine world is doomed to be enslaved by hers. You are not a victim. You are a willing participant. You chose to play the fool. You stepped on stage to perform in her private myth because facing your own emptiness was more frightening than pretending to be someone else's idea of a man. This is where most men stop listening, because it's uncomfortable. This is where the easy answers end and the hard responsibility begins. Jung didn't hand out quick fixes or formulas for success. Instead, he gave you a brutal, lifelong task: to confront yourself, to sit alone with your mind until the illusions crack and the voice in your head telling you that you're nothing without her finally fades. And make no mistake, that voice will fight tooth and nail to survive. It will tell you that you need her, that you are incomplete without her, that no man can live without feminine validation. But Jung's work whispers something far more dangerous and freeing: that the man who can stand on his own, without approval, without applause, without being needed, is the man who is truly free. Free from projection, free from the exhausting performance, free from living as someone else's fantasy. When you reach that place, you don't become cold or detached. You become real. You become grounded, rooted, alive in your own skin. And paradoxically, this is when women are most drawn to you, not because you need them, but because you don't. You smile not out of heartlessness, but because you finally understand. You recognize that she too is on her own journey, that she must confront her animus, wake from her own illusions, and you realize you can't do that work for her. You can only walk your own path. In the end, individuation isn't just a psychological concept. It's the courageous, lonely process of burning away the false selves so the real you can emerge. It demands facing painful truths about yourself and others, accepting that many won't understand or support you as you do. But it also promises freedom. The freedom to live honestly, authentically, without the chains of projection or dependency. That freedom isn't found in being chosen or validated by others. It's found in choosing yourself, standing alone, fully alive, fully responsible, fully free. You can't rescue her from the battles she fights inside herself. What you can do, what Jung did, is walk your own path with such fearless authenticity that you become a living mirror, reflecting raw truth back to anyone brave enough to look. Most will turn away, unwilling to face what you reveal, but a rare few will thank you for it. That's the distinction between being loved for the role you pretend to play and being respected for the man you genuinely become. When you finally shed the need to perform, you'll start to notice something odd. People around you grow uneasy. They feel it, even if they can't quite explain why. Your presence becomes a disruptive force because you no longer fit into the neat, predictable boxes they used to feel secure. Jung warned that a man who has individuated, that is, become fully himself, is not warmly embraced by society. Instead, he is feared, misunderstood, and often dismissed as cold or arrogant. The truth is far more unsettling. You have become untouchable, immune to manipulation, and impossible to sway because you see through the endless charades. And here's the irony. Those who once craved your attention, validation, and approval may grow resentful precisely because you no longer need theirs. Women, especially those still clinging to the fantasy of the perfect man, will accuse you of being emotionally unavailable, too distant, or overly analytical. What they're really saying is they can't control you anymore. You've stepped off their stage, refused to read from their script, and they don't know how to handle a man who refuses to be a character. Without the familiar roles, they're lost because you're no longer a performance. They want an actor, not a man. Jung once wryly observed that what ancient cultures called divine possession, modern psychology rebrands as neurosis. And make no mistake, men chasing external validation are some of the most spiritually unwell among us. You think you're being romantic when you say, "I'd do anything for her," or "she's my everything." But Jung would shake his head and remind you that what you call love is often just a refusal to carry your own soul. It's easier to project your hopes, meaning, and purpose onto a woman and expect her to carry that weight for you, because if she carries it, you don't have to. But here's the brutal truth. When she realizes she was never meant to bear that burden, she will drop it. She must, because no woman, no matter how loving, can hold the weight of a man who refuses to hold himself. When she lets go, you'll feel betrayed. But instead of bitterness, you should feel gratitude. In that moment when the illusion shatters, you finally come face to face with the reality that becoming a man was never her responsibility. It was yours all along. In that stark moment of clarity, you face a crossroads. You can blame her, grow bitter, and join the ranks of angry men who cast blame on women, mocking, resenting, and swearing them off as cowards who never dared to face their own emptiness. Or you can do what Jung would demand. You turn inward. You begin the lonely, terrifying, and ultimately liberating process of individuation, becoming whole without needing someone else to complete you. Because the woman you search for out there is only a reflection of the part of yourself you've abandoned. Until you face that missing piece, every relationship will be a performance, every connection a transaction, and every love a lie. But when you do the inner work, when you embrace your own inner feminine energy and become integrated, you become a man who no longer chases after women. You stop running, manipulating, and performing for approval. You stand firm, fully rooted in your own truth. And from that grounded place, something extraordinary happens. You don't attract women looking for a character to play to. You attract women drawn to the real you. You'll know when it happens because she won't demand a performance, won't try to rewrite your story, and won't fall in love with a fantasy. She'll stand before you, raw and real. Not a goddess seeking worship, but a human being walking her own path alongside you. No masks, no illusions, no power plays. When you meet that woman, you'll instantly see the difference. She won't shower you with grandiose declarations or treat you like the missing piece of her puzzle. She won't seduce you with promises of completion because she isn't broken and she isn't waiting to be saved. She's done the inner work. She's confronted her shadow, faced her animus, and burned away her illusions. That's why she won't need you to perform or to carry her soul. She stands there whole, looking you in the eye, not as a man she wants to mold, but as a man she's ready to meet. This is the real, difficult, and beautiful promise of Jung's work. Freedom comes when you stop living as someone else's idea of a man and start living fully as yourself. It's a lonely journey, but it's the only way to find love that's not built on fantasy, projection, or desperate need. Instead, you find a connection rooted in truth, mutual respect, and genuine companionship. And in that truth, you finally stand unshakable, free, grounded, and alive. When two people truly meet, there's none of the desperation or clinging that so often marks relationships. There's no need to put on a show or perform for approval. What remains is pure, unfiltered truth. Carl Jung called this the rarest and most dangerous kind of love. The kind that asks for nothing but gives everything in return. It's not born out of need or dependency. It's born from freedom. The freedom to choose, the freedom to walk away, the freedom to stand side by side without illusions, without masks, and without fear. But here's a hard truth. Most men will never reach this place. Why? Because most will give up long before they get there. They'll settle for the easy path, the performance, the fantasy, the fleeting high of being seen as someone they're not, because the real work of facing who they truly are feels unbearable. It takes a kind of brutal courage, the kind that tears through your comfort zones and demands you stand alone, stripping away every false layer you've built just to earn approval. But if you do have that courage, if you keep walking, keep standing even when it feels lonely and raw, you'll find yourself on the edge of something terrifyingly beautiful. You'll find yourself. And when that happens, women will no longer be the source of your identity or the mirror reflecting back your worth. They won't be trophies to win or puzzles to complete. They will become something else entirely. Partners, not prizes. Mirrors, not mothers. Allies, not saviors. You'll love them not because you need them, but because you choose to. From a place of strength, from a place of wholeness, from a place that knows exactly who you are, without apology. Jung didn't leave us a simple roadmap. He left us a warning that every man who refuses to face himself will inevitably become a slave to the projections of others, especially the projections of women. Yet he also gave us a challenge to embrace individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole within ourselves. To stop blaming women for the roles we volunteer to play. To stop looking for completion in someone else's eyes. To stop waiting to be chosen. Because the man who fully chooses himself, unapologetically and relentlessly, cannot be controlled by fantasy. He cannot be seduced by performance or reduced to a mere character in someone else's story. Instead, he becomes the author of his own life. If you've made it this far and felt something stir deep inside, don't just scroll past. Don't let this message become another fleeting thought. Take a moment, like this. Share it with a man who needs to hear the truth. Subscribe for more. Your support isn't just for us. It's for every man still caught in illusion, still waiting to be set free. Help us spread this message. Help us wake up the world, one man at a time.